Time to look at this from every angle. Imagine a quiet Tuesday afternoon in the coastal town of Sheerness, located on the Isle of Sheppey in Kent. The tide is out, and barely 1,500 meters from the shoreline, three rusted iron masts poke out of the gray water of the Thames Estuary. They look like the remnants of a forgotten pier or perhaps a small fishing vessel. In reality, these masts belong to the SS Richard Montgomery, a United States Liberty ship that has sat on a sandbank since 1944. Beneath those masts lies an estimated 1,400 tons of high explosives, aging and decaying in one of the busiest shipping lanes in the world. This is not merely a piece of maritime history, it is a live ordnance problem of unprecedented scale. To understand why this wreck remains the single most dangerous underwater site in British waters, we must first examine the specific engineering and logistical context of its arrival and subsequent failure. In August 1944, the Richard Montgomery arrived at the Nore anchorage, part of a massive logistical pipeline supplying the Allied advance in Europe following D-Day. It was a Liberty ship, a class of vessel built for speed of production rather than longevity. These ships were welded together in sections, a revolutionary manufacturing technique at the time, but one that introduced structural vulnerabilities under extreme stress. On this particular voyage, the Montgomery was packed with over 6,000 tons of munitions. The cargo manifest included standard artillery shells, but more critically, it contained thousands of cluster bombs and several massive blockbuster bombs. A blockbuster was exactly what the name implied, a high-capacity, thin-walled bomb designed to level entire city blocks through blast pressure alone. As the ship waited for a pilot to guide it up the Thames, a severe gale blew in. Despite orders to move to deeper water, the ship drifted toward a sandbank known as Sheerness Middle Sands. When the tide went out, the ship did not float, it settled onto the uneven contours of the sand. This brings us to the principle of structural loading in maritime disasters. A ship is designed to be supported uniformly by the displacement of water along the entire length of its hull. When the Montgomery grounded on the sandbank, it became a bridge supported only at its ends. The midsection, loaded with thousands of tons of steel and TNT, was suspended over a dip in the sand. Under the relentless cycling of the tides and the sheer weight of the cargo, the hull reached its breaking point. On the following day, a thunderous crack echoed across the water as the ship snapped in half. This fracture is the central reason the wreck remains there today. While salvage teams managed to remove about half of the cargo from the accessible sections, the break in the hull made the remaining holds structurally unstable and physically treacherous. The salvage operation was abandoned as the ship settled deeper into the mud. Students of history often assume that once a ship is submerged, it is essentially preserved in a static environment. This is a dangerous misconception. The Thames Estuary is a high-energy environment with powerful tidal currents and shifting silts. This leads to the principle of secondary crystallization in aging explosives. Within the holds of the Montgomery are thousands of fuses and primers containing lead azide and other sensitive initiators. Over decades of immersion, the seawater reacts with the metal casings and the explosive fillers. This process can create copper azide crystals. While TNT itself is relatively stable, copper azide is incredibly sensitive to friction, impact, or even slight movement. A student might think that 80 years of salt water would neutralize the gunpowder, but the opposite is often true. The degradation of the stabilizing chemicals can leave the primary explosives in a state where a minor structural collapse of the rested hull could trigger a sympathetic detonation. Consider the potential energy stored in 1,400 tons of TNT. If a single shell were to detonate due to a falling piece of rusted steel, it could trigger a chain reaction through the tightly packed holds. Experts have modeled this scenario, and the results are sobering. An explosion of this magnitude would create a column of water and debris nearly 3 kilometers high and generate a shockwave that would shatter windows for miles. More critically, the sudden displacement of water would generate a localized tsunami. In a shallow estuary like the Thames, this wave would be roughly 5 meters high. Because the wreck is so close to the shore, the town of Sheerness would have almost zero warning before a wall of water hit the sea defenses. This isn't a theoretical edge case, it is a calculated risk that the UK government monitors through annual sonar surveys and structural assessments. There is a recurring question as to why the wreck isn't simply dismantled or the explosives neutralized by specialized divers. This introduces the principle of risk benefit asymmetry in ordnance disposal. In a standard disposal operation, a single unexploded bomb is moved or detonated in a controlled environment. With the Montgomery, the sheer volume of material means that any attempt to move one crate of munitions could disturb the hypersensitive crystals formed in the others. The risk of an accidental trigger during a salvage attempt is deemed higher than the risk of leaving it alone. This is the subtle part of the dilemma. By trying to fix the problem, you might inadvertently cause the very catastrophe you are trying to prevent. Consequently, the policy has been one of non-interference, effectively turning the site into a restricted zone where even the vibration from a passing ship's engine is a variable to be managed. Beyond the physical instability of the explosives, there is the human element of security. The wreck sits in just 15 meters of water. At low tide, the masts are a clear landmark. This proximity to a major population center and the visibility of the site creates a unique security challenge. The area is designated as a prohibited space under the Protection of Wrecks Act, monitored 24 hours a day by radar and surface patrols. The concern here is not just accidental collision by a stray vessel, but the potential for deliberate interference. In the context of modern security, the Montgomery is often described as a static, dirty bomb. While the explosives are conventional, the proximity to London's shipping arteries and the sheer scale of the potential blast make it a high-value target for disruption. The edge case here is the slow-motion nature of the threat. Unlike a ticking clock, the decay of the Montgomery happens over decades, leading to a sense of complacency that security forces must actively fight against. The ongoing management of the site involves a delicate balance of engineering and environmental monitoring. Recent surveys have shown that the masts are beginning to lean further, indicating that the remaining hull is finally succumbing to corrosion and the weight of the silt. This has prompted new discussions about whether to cut the masts down to reduce the leverage they exert on the wreck during storms. Here, the principle of structural integrity meets the reality of material fatigue. Every time a diver goes down or a remote-operated vehicle approaches the wreck, they are interacting with a structure that is thinner and more brittle than it was the year before. The misconception that the ship will eventually just dissolve into the sand ignores the fact that the explosives inside do not dissolve. They simply become more exposed and less protected from the shifting environment. Ultimately, the SS Richard Montgomery represents a permanent tension between historical accidents and modern safety. It is a monument to the industrial scale of World War II logistics and a reminder of the persistent nature of wartime remnants. The residents of the Medway area live in the shadow of a shipwreck that holds enough power to reshape their coastline in an instant. Understanding the Montgomery requires looking past the rusted masts and seeing the chemical and structural volatility beneath the surface. It is a case study in how we manage risks that cannot be eliminated, only monitored and mitigated. The ship serves as a reminder that the remnants of the past are rarely as buried as they seem. And that's the landscape.